Native women said, "I'm too old for love." Until Cowboy whispered, "I've waited my whole life," for she had learned how to wake up before the sun without an alarm. For years her body remembered responsibility better than rest. Even now, in her late 50s, she rose quietly while the world was still dark, moving through her small house with practiced care. The floorboards creaked, but she knew where to step, so they wouldn't. Outside, the land waited, wide and patient, just like it always had. She was a native woman who had lived most of her life putting others first. Her name carried meaning in her language, a reminder of where she came from and who her people were.
Elders respected her.
Younger ones looked to her for advice. She was the woman people called when something needed to be done right, when a family was struggling, or when traditions needed to be remembered properly. She never said no if she could help. From the outside, her life looked full. Inside, it felt quiet. Her days followed a steady rhythm. Mornings were for work and chores. Afternoons were for community, phone calls, errands, and checking in on relatives. Evenings were slow. Sometimes she sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sky change colors. Other times, she sorted old photos or folded laundry that didn't need folding yet. The silence never frightened her, but it often reminded her of what was missing. Love had once been part of her life, but that was long ago. When she was younger, she believed in it deeply. She believed that if you were loyal, patient, and kind, love would stay. She believed that building a life together meant sharing burdens, not placing them all on one person. She believed that effort would always be returned. Experience taught her otherwise. She had loved before, fully and honestly. She had given her time, her trust, and her heart. But life had not followed the path she imagined. Promises faded. People left. Some losses came suddenly, others slowly, like water dripping away stone. Each disappointment taught her to expect less, until expecting nothing felt safer. By the time she reached her 40s, love no longer felt like something meant for her. She didn't say it out loud often, but when she did, she laughed as if it were a joke. "That part of life is over," she would say. "I'm too old for that now." People usually laughed with her, assuming she meant it lightly. They didn't hear what sat underneath the words. She had learned to be strong because she had to be. When family needed help, she stepped in. When elders grew tired, she listened. When younger relatives made mistakes, she guided them gently. She became the steady one, the dependable one, the one who held things together when others couldn't. But no one ever asked who held her. At community gatherings, she often stayed near the edges. She smiled, greeted everyone, and helped serve food or clean up afterward. She enjoyed being useful. It gave her a purpose and kept her from thinking too much. When couples laughed together or sat close, she noticed, but she didn't linger on it. She told herself she didn't need that kind of closeness anymore. Still, some nights were harder than others. On those nights, memories came back without warning. A voice she hadn't heard in years. A feeling she once thought would last forever. She didn't cry often, but when she did it quietly, sitting alone where no one could see. By morning, she wiped her face, took a deep breath, and returned to being the woman everyone depended on. She believed love belonged to another version of herself. The younger woman who still hoped, who hadn't yet learned how easily things could fall apart. That woman felt far away now, almost like someone she used to know rather than someone she once was. People sometimes tried to encourage her. Friends would say, "You never know," or "There's someone out there for everyone." She nodded politely, but inside she disagreed. She didn't want false hope. Hope, she had learned, could hurt just as much as loss. She also didn't want to be seen as someone waiting to be rescued. She was proud of the life she had built on her own. She had survived difficult years, raised family, honored her culture, and kept going even when things were heavy. She didn't feel broken. She just felt finished with that chapter. To her, love now seemed like something that belonged to youth, to smooth beginnings and open roads. Her road felt well-traveled. She knew every turn, every bump, every place where the ground dipped unexpectedly. There were no surprises left, or so she believed. When she looked in the mirror, She didn't see what others might see. She saw time written gently across her face. She saw stories, endurance, and lessons learned the hard way. She saw someone who had earned her peace. She didn't see someone anyone would choose romantically, and she had made peace with that idea. Or at least she thought she had. Sometimes when she sat alone in the evening light, she wondered what it would feel like to be chosen. Not because she was useful or dependable, but simply because someone wanted her. The thought made her uncomfortable, so she pushed it away quickly, wanting something she believed she couldn't have felt pointless. She told herself she was content. Most days, that was true. Her life was not empty. It was just quiet, in a way that echoed. She had no idea that this quiet season, the one she believed was about settling and acceptance, was actually a beginning. She didn't know that somewhere ahead, in the most ordinary of circumstances, someone would see her not as too old or past her time, but as exactly who he had been waiting for. For now, she simply lived her days as she always had, steady, strong, and unaware that the story she thought was finished had not yet reached its most important chapter. He first appeared in her life quietly, almost like the wind through the tall grass of the plains. No one announced him, no bells rang, and yet his presence was impossible to ignore once it was noticed. He was a cowboy, the kind of man shaped by years of open land, hard work, and quiet discipline. His skin carried a sun-brown tan, and his hands were strong, marked by labor and calluses from years of handling ropes, tools, and animals. His eyes, however, held something unusual, a calm attentiveness, as if he truly saw the people and things around him, not just glanced past them. Their first meeting was ordinary, almost mundane. She had been at a community gathering, helping set up chairs and tables, arranging food, and making sure everything was ready for the event. He walked in with no fanfare, just a slow, steady presence. He helped where needed, though he did not announce it or try to impress anyone. He moved quietly, taking small tasks, always careful not to disrupt anyone. She noticed him immediately, not because he stood out, but because he seemed different from the usual crowd. Most men approached her with curiosity, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with intentions she could see from a mile away. But him? He didn't seem interested in impressing anyone, not even her. There was no pressure in his words, no expectation in his smile. It was simply respect. He began to appear often in her life, but never in ways that felt overwhelming. At first she thought it was coincidence. Perhaps he simply attended the same gatherings, worked in the same areas, or ran into the same neighbors. But over time she noticed a pattern. He seemed to notice the small things, her favorite cup of coffee at the local diner, the way she preferred certain paths when walking, the way she organized her small home. Not in a way that was intrusive, but in a way that showed awareness. He listened. Truly listened. In a world where many spoke to be heard, he spoke to understand. When she shared stories of her past, he did not rush her. When she laughed about something small or insignificant, he laughed too, genuinely, not just out of politeness. He asked questions that invited her to share more, but never pried beyond what she was willing to reveal. She noticed this. Most people only heard what they wanted to hear, but he seemed to hear everything. At first, she resisted noticing him too closely. She reminded herself that she was too old for love, that life had already passed her those opportunities. She told herself that she did not need to be impressed or charmed by anyone. And yet, he had a way of appearing just at the right moment, of saying things that made her smile without even trying. Their conversations were slow, measured, and unhurried. He never rushed, never tried to force familiarity. When they talked about work, he spoke with pride in his craft but without arrogance. When he talked about his life, he shared experiences honestly, but without unnecessary drama. He had a way of telling stories that drew people in, not because they were exciting, but because they were real. She began to realize that what she had assumed about him, that he was just polite, just another man, was only partly true. There was depth there, a steadiness she hadn't encountered in a long time. Most men she knew either rushed toward attention or avoided connection. He seemed to move at a different pace entirely, as though the world could wait. as though every person and every moment deserved patience. Even his silences were meaningful. There were moments when they sat together without speaking. Sometimes it was during work, cleaning up after events, or tending to animals. Sometimes it was in the quiet of the evening, watching the sky shift from orange to pink to deep blue. She expected those silences to be awkward, but they were not. In his presence, silence felt comfortable, even gentle. He never complimented her in ways that made her uncomfortable. He didn't make remarks about her appearance or try to flatter her with words that felt empty. Instead, he acknowledged her efforts, her skills, her knowledge. He noticed when she did something thoughtful for someone else, when she managed a situation with grace, when she showed kindness where it was least expected. It was as if he recognized her value, not as someone to be won, but as someone already complete. She began to feel a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. Curiosity because she was drawn to his steadiness, to the quiet strength he carried. Caution because she had been hurt before and knew better than to let herself believe in sudden chances. She reminded herself daily, she was too old for love. She had her routines, her responsibilities, her life exactly as it was. She did not need disruption. She did not need someone to fill an empty space that did not exist. But still, he continued to appear, and the more she saw him, the more she realized that his presence wasn't just coincidence. There was intentionality in the way he moved through life, a choice in the way he treated people, and perhaps, though she did not want to admit it, in the way he looked at her. It was during one ordinary day while helping at a small cultural event that she first truly noticed him looking at her in a way that was different. Not like the polite observation of a neighbor, but a quiet acknowledgement that she existed in full, that every line of her life, every story she carried, mattered. For the first time in years she felt seen, not as a helper, not as a caregiver, not as someone to be admired from afar, but as someone worth noticing deeply. The moment was brief, almost imperceptible. Their eyes met, and then he returned to his work. She tried to ignore it, shaking her head and reminding herself of all the reasons this should not matter. But it did. That small connection lingered in her mind long after the event ended, longer than she wanted it to. She began to see him in other ways, in the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, in the way he treated others, respectful and patient, in the way he never sought to change her, never tried to rush her into anything, never assumed she needed what he had to offer. He was a presence that invited trust rather than demanded attention. At first, she tried to remain indifferent. She told herself it was silly to feel anything. She reminded herself of all the lessons life had taught her. Love does not always last. People leave, and hope is often a dangerous companion. Yet she couldn't stop noticing him. She began to look forward to his presence. Not in a way that made her restless, but in a way that added a subtle warmth to her days. When she saw him, her day felt lighter. When she spoke with him even briefly, she felt understood in ways she hadn't felt in years. Her curiosity about him grew slowly, carefully, because she refused to let herself hope for anything more. She asked herself questions she did not answer aloud. Could someone like him really care for someone like her? Could he see her beyond her age, beyond her past, beyond all the experiences that had taught her to guard her heart? He never forced an answer. He never pushed. He simply continued to exist in her life in ways that were steady, reliable, and unassuming. And the more she observed him, the more she realized how rare that was. She remembered other men she had known in her life, some charming, some brash, some desperate for affection, but none who carried such quiet strength, none who seemed content simply to be near her without expecting anything. He was not dramatic. He was not impatient. He did not compete for her attention or try to win her with words or gifts. He was simply himself, and that authenticity was magnetic. She began to notice small gestures, the way he would hand her a cup of water when she was tired, the way he would step aside to give her space when she needed it, the way he remembered details she had mentioned in passing weeks before. She realized that this was not random kindness. It was deliberate attention, an acknowledgement of her life and her presence. Despite herself, she began to feel a quiet admiration for him. Not the kind of admiration that led to longing or expectation, but a deep appreciation for someone who could be steady in a world that was often unpredictable. Someone who showed respect without condition, patience without complaint, and understanding without judgment. For the first time in many years, she felt a shift in her own perception of what could be possible. She began to wonder, not daring to hope, but simply noticing, what it might be like to experience kindness and attentiveness on this level. She wondered what it would feel like to share space with someone who truly saw her. Yet she reminded herself constantly that she was too old for love. She repeated the phrase as a shield against the stirrings of curiosity and subtle hope. She did not want to imagine anything more. She did not want to risk disappointment. Life had taught her to guard her heart fiercely. And still, he stayed. Day by day, his presence became part of the rhythm of her life. He never asked for more than she was willing to give. He never sought to alter her routines or expectations. He simply continued to be consistent, patient, and kind. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to let down a small piece of the wall she had built around her heart. It was not a sudden change. There were no fireworks or dramatic declarations. It was subtle, quiet, and deeply human. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her, respect her, and value her, not for what she could give, but for who she already was. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to notice him without resistance. She had begun to notice him, yes, but noticing was not the same as trusting. Years of experience had taught her that people often said one thing and did another. People often left when you needed them most. People often hurt the ones they claimed to care about. And she had learned, painfully, that hope could be dangerous. So, even as he continued to show up in her life, she kept her distance. She smiled at him politely, responded to his kindness, even enjoyed the quiet moments they shared, but she always reminded herself that she could not allow herself to hope. Not again. Not ever. At first it seemed manageable. She could enjoy his presence without letting it affect her. But over time, it became clear that her heart was more stubborn than her mind. The little gestures, the quiet attentiveness, the way he listened without judgment, it all chipped away at her defenses. Slowly, quietly, she began to feel something she had believed she would never feel again. It was a strange and unfamiliar sensation. She didn't know how to label it. She felt a warmth when he spoke to her. She felt a lightness in her chest when he noticed her without needing anything in return. She felt curiosity, wonder, and even joy, but all carefully contained. She told herself that this was harmless, that she could observe her feelings without acting on them, that she could admire from a distance. But emotions, like rivers, have a way of flowing whether you try to stop them or not. And soon, she found herself thinking about him at odd times, while preparing meals, walking through her home, or sitting quietly by the window at dusk. She remembered the way he had listened to her stories, the way he had remembered her words, and the way he treated others with steady patience. It was not something she had expected to notice or value, but she did. And then came the memories, the ones she had carefully tucked away in boxes of thought and time. Memories of people who had come and gone, of promises broken, of love that had once felt so strong and so true, only to fade into disappointment. She could almost feel the weight of those experiences pressing against her chest again. She reminded herself sternly. She was too old for love. She had lived a full life without romance. She had built a life that was complete in itself. She had raised her family, contributed to her community, preserved traditions, and survived hardships that would have broken someone less resilient. She had no need for someone else to complete her. Yet the memories did not stay neatly in the past. They surfaced now in strange ways, fueled by his presence. The kindness he offered made her reflect on what had been missing in her life. The patience he displayed highlighted how impatient others had been. The quiet confidence he carried made her recall all the times she had doubted herself. She found herself in an internal battle, one she had not experienced in decades. Part of her wanted to shut it all down, to walk away, to pretend that she had never noticed, to pretend that she did not care. Part of her, however, could not deny the simple truth. He was different. Something about him felt authentic in a way she had not felt in a long time. He was steady where others had been unpredictable. He was patient where others had been hasty. He was kind where others had been selfish. And perhaps most unsettling of all, he was present. Not just physically, but fully. He noticed, he listened, he respected, and he understood. This awareness brought both comfort and fear. Comfort, because it was nice to feel seen after so many years of responsibility and duty. Fear, because she knew what it meant to hope and then to be disappointed. She did not want to risk her heart again. She had built walls around it, thick and strong, and she was reluctant to let them down. The struggle grew more intense over time. Even ordinary moments felt charged with meaning. When he offered her a hand with a heavy box, she felt something flutter inside her chest. When he shared a quiet laugh over a simple joke, she felt her defenses soften ever so slightly. When he paused to notice the smallest details of her life, she realized that he saw her in ways others never had. She tried to remind herself that it was all harmless, that she could appreciate his kindness without imagining a deeper connection, that she could acknowledge the subtle warmth in her chest without giving it meaning, that she could enjoy his company without expecting anything more. But the heart rarely listens to reason. One evening they were walking together after a long day of community work. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air smelled faintly of earth and grass. The quiet was comforting, the kind of silence that is shared between two people who do not need constant words to fill the space. She found herself noticing him in a way she had not intended, the way the sun highlighted his hair, the calm in his posture, the gentle attentiveness in his eyes. Her chest tightened slightly, and she reminded herself again. She was too old for this. She had no room for such feelings. She could not allow herself to hope. And yet, as the days passed, she noticed other people noticing him too. Neighbors, friends, and family occasionally commented on the quiet way he moved, the way he treated people with respect, the way he seemed different from anyone else in town. Some remarked that he was charming. Others said he was patient and kind, but no one, she realized, truly understood what it was like to feel his presence in her life. To feel seen after decades of being responsible, overlooked and unnoticed. The more she observed, the more conflicted she became. She had learned to rely only on herself. She had learned that self-sufficiency was safety. And yet, she felt drawn to him, pulled by an invisible thread that was neither logical nor easily dismissed. It was during one particularly quiet afternoon that the internal conflict reached a peak. They were sitting outside repairing a fence that had been damaged in a storm. She had been working steadily, careful not to let her thoughts wander. But as he handed her a tool, their hands brushed briefly. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through her. Her mind screamed for caution. Do not hope, do not imagine, do not expect. And yet, a part of her could not stop imagining. She found herself wondering what it would be like to share more moments with him. To laugh together, to share stories in the quiet of evening, to be noticed fully, as a person and not just a caretaker. That night, she lay in bed and turned the events over in her mind. She felt excitement, but she also felt fear. She felt possibility, but also remembered past disappointments. She realized that she was standing at a crossroads between the life she had built and the life that might be waiting for her if she dared to allow someone in. Her thoughts were interrupted by the memory of his words, spoken softly weeks before. I notice you. I see you. I respect you. He had said them without expectation, without pressure, just a statement of fact, and she realized, with a mixture of fear and longing, that she had never heard anyone speak to her like that before. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that someone could genuinely care for her, not because of her appearance, not because of what she could do for them, but simply because of who she was. And yet, she was still hesitant. Years of experience had taught her that life rarely followed expectations. Hope, she knew, could be dangerous. She could not let herself become vulnerable without knowing for certain that it would not lead to heartbreak. So she held back, carefully, choosing observation over participation, reflection over engagement. She watched him, noticed him, and allowed herself small moments of connection without surrendering her heart. She reminded herself every day she was too old for love. She had everything she needed in her own life. She had built a life that was full, meaningful, and complete. And still, she could not stop thinking about him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each interaction with him became a quiet test of her resolve. She noticed the way he showed up, the way he stayed steady even when things were difficult, the way he respected boundaries without complaint. And in those moments, her walls began to feel less necessary. She began to understand that vulnerability was not weakness, but the possibility of something extraordinary. She did not rush. She did not act impulsively. She simply began to allow herself to notice, to feel, and to consider. She did not know what would come next, but for the first time in many years she felt the stirrings of something she thought had passed her by. Hope. And with hope came fear. But for the first time she realized that fear did not have to be a barrier. It could be a guide. It could help her move carefully, thoughtfully, and intentionally. She could honor her past experiences while still allowing herself the possibility of connection. In the quiet moments of reflection, she began to see him not as a threat to her peace, but as a presence that might enhance it. She began to wonder what it would feel like to share life with someone who truly understood her. She began to imagine, not recklessly, not carelessly, but with a quiet, tentative curiosity. And she knew deep down that the choice would soon be hers, to remain in the safety of her solitary life, or to step carefully into a possibility that could change everything. She had spent months observing him, noticing the small ways he moved through her life, listening carefully to his stories, and appreciating the quiet patience he offered without expectation. But now a change was coming that she had not anticipated, a moment she had both feared and, in secret, hoped for. It began one late afternoon when the sun was low, casting long shadows across the open field. They were helping repair a fence, as they often did together, working side by side in comfortable silence. The air was cool and smelled faintly of earth and grass. Birds flew lazily overhead, and the occasional sound of a distant animal added to the calm of the evening. She was focused on her work, carefully hammering a post into the ground, when she sensed him watching her. She looked up, expecting nothing, and found his gaze steady and soft. There was a seriousness in his eyes she had not seen before, a depth that went beyond mere attentiveness. It was as if he had something to say, something important, but he was waiting for the right moment. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. His voice was low and calm, carrying neither urgency nor demand. "I've waited my whole life for someone like you," he said. Her hands froze mid-action. For a moment she could not breathe. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her heart skip a beat. She looked at him, searching for any hint that he was joking, testing her, or exaggerating, but there was none. He was sincere. She wanted to respond, to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Part of her wanted to run, to remind herself that she was too old, that love was not meant for her anymore. Another part of her wanted to step closer, to reach out and touch the truth she had long denied could exist. It continued, gently, patiently, sensing her hesitation. "I am not here to rush you or to change your life. I am here because I see you. I respect you. I admire the life you've built, and I want to be a part of it, if you will let me." She thought of all the times she had been disappointed, all the moments when she had trusted and lost. She thought of the barriers she had built, the walls she had painstakingly constructed around her heart. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that someone could truly see her, accept her, and care for her without conditions, but fear made her hesitate. He noticed her pause and did not press. Instead, he offered a small, encouraging smile. "You don't have to answer me now. I just wanted you to know the truth." Those words lingered in the air, heavier than any breeze. She felt the warmth of the setting sun on her face, the quiet strength of the land beneath her feet, and the reality of his presence beside her. For the first time in decades, she felt that love, real, honest, patient, was not something she had to chase or earn. It was being offered freely, without expectation. Over the next few days, they continued their routine, but everything had changed. She noticed him differently now, not just as a kind presence, but as someone who had made himself vulnerable, who had risked speaking his truth. It was a boldness she admired deeply, and it stirred emotions she had long tried to ignore. She began to reflect on what his words meant. He had waited his whole life, not for youth, not for beauty, not for perfection, but for someone real, someone steady, someone who had lived, learned, and endured. And he had found her. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had believed she was too old, that the chapter of love in her life was closed. But now, she saw that love does not follow rules of age, timing, or expectation. It arrives when it is meant to, often in ways that surprise even the most cautious hearts. That evening, she found herself thinking about him long after the sun had set. She replayed his words over and over in her mind, savoring their meaning and their truth. She realized that she had been guarding her heart not because it was too late, but because she had not yet met someone who made it feel safe to open again. In the following weeks, their interactions became more intentional, yet still gentle. He continued to show his care through actions rather than grand gestures. He helped with tasks, shared quiet moments, and listened with patience. She began to allow herself small signs of trust, smiles, laughter, brief touches of the hand, without fear or hesitation. One afternoon, as they walked through a familiar trail, he stopped and turned to her, his gaze unwavering. I don't want to rush anything," he said softly. "I just want you to know that I am here, and I am not going anywhere. You don't have to decide today, or tomorrow, or even next week. But when you are ready, I will be here." Her chest tightened with emotion. She realized how rare it was to meet someone who spoke truth without pressure, who offered love without demanding it in return. Her heart, long cautious and guarded, began to open, just a little, to the possibility of something new. They spent more time together sharing meals, talking about their lives and enjoying quiet evenings under the stars. She began to notice the little things he did, the way he remembered her favorite tea, the way he waited patiently when she needed space. Each act, small as it seemed, carried the weight of his sincerity. She also noticed the changes within herself. She felt lighter, more open, and more willing to embrace moments of joy. She realized that vulnerability did not have to be frightening. It could be a bridge to something meaningful and lasting. She began to see herself through his eyes, not as someone too old, too cautious, or too worn, but as someone worthy of love, respect, and companionship. One evening they sat together by a quiet river, watching the water flow steadily past. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. She did not pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the connection, the quiet affirmation of his presence. It was a moment of trust, of acceptance, and of hope. "I see you," he whispered, "all of you. Every story, every scar, every triumph. I see it, and I want to be part of your life." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not feel sadness. She felt relief, joy, and a deep sense of peace. She realized that love had not passed her by. It had been waiting, patient and steady, until the right moment arrived. In the days that followed, they continued to grow closer, building a relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and shared values. She allowed herself to enjoy the warmth of his company, the quiet laughter, and the simple pleasures of life together. She no longer felt the need to guard her heart so fiercely. Instead, she embraced the possibility of a love that was gentle, steady, and enduring. She reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Life had taught her resilience, patience, and strength. She had learned to navigate loss, disappointment, and solitude. And now she understood that those experiences had prepared her for this love, one that did not demand perfection, one that honored her past while offering a hopeful future. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the life they could build together. Mornings filled with quiet conversation, evenings spent watching the sun set, days of shared work and laughter. She realized that love did not have to be grand or dramatic. It could be simple, steady, and deeply meaningful. She also realized that it was okay to be vulnerable, to open her heart, and to trust again. The fear she had carried for so long was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She understood that taking a chance on love was not a risk. It was an opportunity to experience a depth of connection she had long denied herself. And so, she began to embrace the possibility of love, slowly and carefully, but with a heart that was ready to accept it. She no longer believed that she was too old or that the chapter had passed. She understood now that love arrives in its own time, patient and unwavering, for those who are willing to notice it, to receive it, and to cherish it. The cowboy's words echoed in her mind, a promise of steady companionship and enduring care. "I've waited my whole life for someone like you." She understood now that love was not about rushing or demanding. It was about patience, respect, and seeing the other person fully, and she knew, without a doubt, that she was ready to step into this next chapter of her life, not with fear, but with hope, trust, and an open heart. Life, she realized, had a way of surprising those who believed the best years had already passed. What had once felt like quiet resignation now blossomed into something tender, steady, and deeply fulfilling. She had learned over decades that the world could be unpredictable, that people could disappoint, and that hope often arrived slowly, in small increments. But she also learned that patience could be rewarded in ways she had never expected. Since he had spoken those simple words, "I've waited my whole life for someone like you," her life had quietly changed. The world seemed fuller, brighter, and somehow lighter. Though nothing in her routine had drastically shifted, she still tended her home, cared for her family, and fulfilled her responsibilities. But there was now an invisible warmth threading through every day, a gentle reminder that she was seen, valued, and cherished. Their days together were simple, yet every ordinary moment felt meaningful. They would rise early, sharing breakfast in the soft morning light. Sometimes they worked on the land together, repairing fences, feeding animals, or tending small gardens. He was patient and consistent, never rushing her, never demanding, simply sharing his presence. Even chores became something to look forward to when done side by side, turning the mundane into moments of quiet joy. In the evenings, they often walked together, hands occasionally brushing, sometimes intertwined, sometimes simply side by side. The sunsets, once a quiet ritual she observed alone, became something they shared, a mutual appreciation of color, light, and the slow, calming rhythm of nature. These small acts, repeated day after day, became the foundation of something steady, reliable, and deeply comforting. She found herself laughing more, sometimes at jokes he told, sometimes at little observations they made about the world around them. Laughter, she realized, had been missing from her life for longer than she had cared to admit. And with each laugh, each shared moment, the walls she had built around her heart grew weaker, softer, more open. But the most profound change was internal. She began to see herself differently, through the eyes of someone who genuinely cared for her. She saw not just the years, the responsibilities, and the experiences she had carried, but the strength, wisdom, and kindness that had shaped her into the woman she was. She saw herself as worthy of love, not conditional love, not admiration from afar, but real, patient, and unhurried love that welcomed her fully. She thought often of the fear that had kept her cautious for so many years. The fear of disappointment, the fear of being hurt again, the fear of hoping for something that might never come. She realized now that those fears had not disappeared entirely. They were part of her, part of the life she had lived, but they no longer held the same power over her. They became reminders of her resilience rather than barriers to connection. The cowboy, for his part, never pressured her, never demanded her attention, and never tried to change her routines. He respected her independence, her responsibilities, and the life she had built. And in doing so, he gave her the freedom to explore her feelings at her own pace, to trust him gradually, and to allow herself to experience joy without fear. There were moments of quiet intimacy, small gestures that spoke volumes. He would make her favorite tea in the morning, remembering exactly how she liked it. He would bring a small flower from the field, not because it was grand, but because it was thoughtful. He would pause when she spoke, listening fully, responding with care, never cutting her short or dismissing her words. In these small, consistent acts, she saw the depth of his care, and her heart responded in kind. Over time, they began sharing more personal stories, the kind of stories one reserves for those truly trusted. She spoke of her childhood, her family, her struggles and joys. He listened without judgment, offering understanding and occasional gentle humor. In turn, he shared his experiences, his challenges, and his dreams. Each story brought them closer, weaving a tapestry of shared understanding, respect, and quiet affection. He began to notice the beauty in routine. The way they could sit together in silence without it feeling awkward, the way their work complemented each other, the way their conversations flowed naturally. Love, she realized, was not always dramatic or overwhelming. It could be steady, reliable, and deeply nourishing. It could exist in shared glances, in the comfort of presence, in laughter, in quiet moments, and in the trust of being fully known. Family and friends began to notice the change in her. They saw the warmth in her eyes, the lightness in her step, and the gentle smiles that appeared more often. They noticed how she spoke of him, the care and respect in her voice, and the patience with which she allowed the relationship to grow. They remarked quietly, with smiles of understanding, that it seemed she had found something rare and meaningful, a love that complemented rather than complicated her life. She found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought her here. Life had not always been easy. There had been loss, disappointment, and moments of deep solitude. She had carried responsibilities for others, prioritized the needs of her family and community, and faced challenges with resilience and determination. And yet, despite all of that, love had found her, not as a sudden, overwhelming force, but as a gentle, patient presence that respected her past while inviting her into a shared future. The realization brought tears to her eyes more than once. She understood now that life's timing is not always predictable, and that love can arrive when least expected, in ways that honor who you are and what you have lived through. She understood that being too old for love was not a limitation, but a misconception. Love, she realized, had no age requirement. It only required openness, patience, and the courage to accept it when it comes. The cowboy's presence had taught her many lessons. She had learned that vulnerability could be safe when placed in the right hands. She had learned that patience and consistency could build trust stronger than any grand gesture. She had learned that love does not demand change, perfection, or surrender. It offers partnership, respect, and shared joy. And perhaps most importantly, she had learned that it was never too late to experience love fully and honestly. They began to make small plans for the future. Not grandiose plans, not plans that would disrupt the life she had built, but simple, meaningful plans. A trip to a nearby town, attending a cultural gathering together, sharing more quiet evenings under the stars. Each plan carried a sense of anticipation, a promise of continued companionship, and a recognition of the joy in sharing life with someone who truly understood her. She found herself waking up each day with a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the small moments, the shared laughter, the quiet understanding, and the steady presence of someone who cared deeply. She understood now that love was not always about passion or urgency. Sometimes it was about consistency, reliability, and the quiet certainty that comes from knowing someone will be there day after day. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Each day brought small discoveries about each other, moments of joy and shared experiences that strengthened their bond. She noticed how his presence made ordinary tasks enjoyable, how his laughter lightened even the heaviest days, and how his quiet strength gave her confidence to embrace life fully. In those months, she realized that her life had grown richer, not because it had changed entirely, but because someone had chosen to walk alongside her. She no longer felt that love was a chapter behind her. She saw it as a living, breathing part of her present, a source of comfort, joy, and companionship that added meaning to her already full life. She also realized that love was not about losing oneself, but about gaining a deeper understanding of oneself through connection with another. She had been independent, strong, and capable long before he arrived, but with him she discovered a new depth to her own heart, a capacity for trust, openness, and shared joy she had long thought she had outgrown. On a particularly quiet evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, she took his hand in hers. She felt the warmth of his touch, the steady presence of his hand, and the unspoken promise of continued companionship. She realized that the love she had once believed was behind her was now unfolding gently, beautifully, and fully in front of her. "I never imagined this," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and gratitude. He smiled, a calm, steady smile that had become so familiar.
"Love has its own timing," he replied.
"And sometimes it waits patiently for the right hearts to be ready." She laughed quietly, a sound that carried lightness and relief. She understood now that patience, trust, and openness had brought her to this moment. She understood that the love they shared was not hurried, forced, or dependent on fleeting emotions. It was steady, enduring. As the stars began to appear one by one in the evening sky, she rested her head on his shoulder. She felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet joy, and a profound gratitude for the journey that had led her here. She realized that life, with all its unpredictability, had given her something rare and beautiful, a love that honored her past, celebrated her present, and offered a hopeful future. In the quiet of the night, she whispered softly, more to herself than to him, "I never thought I would feel this again. I never thought love would find me at this stage of my life." He squeezed her hand gently, his presence a quiet affirmation of her words. "It found you," he said simply, "because you were ready. And because I was patient enough to wait." And in that moment she understood fully that love does not belong to youth alone. Love belongs to those who are willing to notice it, to receive it, and to nurture it. It belongs to hearts that are open, minds that are patient, and spirits that are willing to embrace connection without fear. Her life, once quiet and reserved, had grown fuller, richer, and more meaningful. She had discovered that love could arrive gently, patiently, and unexpectedly. And she knew that from this moment on she would continue to walk through life not alone, but alongside someone who truly saw her, valued her, and cherished her every single day. She smiled finally and completely, knowing that love had indeed found her, not despite her past, but because of it.